What's going on today, guys? Welcome back to the On the Hill HVAC channel. Got another informative video for you today. Today's video is going to be an advanced version of the refrigeration cycle. We're going to talk more about superheat and subcooling, those type of things, and go into a more in-depth explanation of the refrigeration cycle. But before we start the video, I'd like to ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Once we hit a certain amount of subscribers, once we hit monetization level, we'll try to start doing some giveaways and some things like that. So just go ahead, feel free to share the channel too. Would love to do that so we can grow the channel. So let's get into today's video. If you watch the first refrigeration cycle video, you will know that we kind of start off with the compressor. You can start off with any component in the refrigeration cycle, but I like to start with the compressor because the compressor is the heart of the refrigeration cycle. The job of the compressor is to compress vapor refrigerant into liquid refrigerant. The refrigerant leaves the compressor as a high pressure, high temperature, superheated vapor. So where does this refrigerant gain all that heat? Because it comes in to the compressor at a lot lower temperature. So where does it gain all that heat? Well, one of the places, or the main place it gains that heat, is the heat of compression. Once you go to compress vapors, just the heat of compression will add heat into that refrigerant, and the fact that we're pushing it to a higher pressure. Of course, temperature and pressure are related, so the higher the pressure is, the higher the temperature is going to be. So that's why that refrigerant can get so hot. Next, we're going on to the discharge line. Didn't really talk about the discharge line in the last one a whole lot, but really the discharge line is just the line leaving the compressor. You've got a little arrow pointing to one there coming out of a compressor. This one's going to be your smaller line coming out of the compressor. So, of course, I already mentioned that this line is a line leaving the compressor that feeds vapor refrigerant into the condenser coil. The temperature of this line is usually around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take a little. That's just an approximation. Of course, this is depending on the application and conditions. This is dependent upon if you have an AC application, if you have a low temp freezer application, if you have a higher temp or freezer application. That number kind of all depends on that application. The refrigerant in this line is a high pressure, high temperature superheated vapor still. Once we leave that discharge line, like I said, it's that line going into the condenser. So here we reach the condenser coil, and I've got a picture there. It's an example of a condenser coil. So this is the coil you're going to see at your outdoor unit. It's actually what makes the outdoor unit look the way it is. It's that big, sometimes black, sometimes silver, but those are just the fins that protect it. But it's that big coil that wraps around the outside of that unit. So three things happen in the condenser coil. Three main things happen. So the first is the rejection of heat, and the way this heat is rejected is from a condenser fan. That condenser fan pulls air across that coil and rejects heat out of the top of that condensing unit. And we also have a state change in the condenser coil. So the refrigerant changes state from a vapor to a liquid. And once that refrigerant is at that state change, the refrigerant is being subcooled. Granted, I said that wrong. You can still subcool a liquid before a state change. But so the big term subcooling is typically what we use to describe how much the refrigerant is cooled past the vapor to liquid state change. And so I mentioned that term in the last video, but I didn't really describe how to measure that, where we get that, what does that number mean. So subcooling is measured by this simple formula. Subcooling equals condensing temperature minus temperature. And that condensing temperature is the condensing temperature, and the T is the liquid line temperature. Now, where do we get that condensing temperature from? So, when you go up to a condensing unit, you're going to hook up your gauges. And you're going to get that condensing temperature from calculating the pressure on your high side gauge. Most gauges sometimes will have a conversion chart already on them where you can see that condensing temperature. But sometimes you have to go to a PT chart. And there's a good couple apps online. I like to use the REF Tools app online by Danfoss. That's just one I like to use. It's got a nice little refrigerant slider in it. But 410 would have a set pressure or set temperature for the certain pressure that they're at. And any refrigerant will do that. This doesn't just apply to 410. I'm just using 410 as an example because I work more on AC applications. So the liquid line temperature is going to be measured by attaching a temperature probe or temperature clamp to the line leaving the condenser coil. That's your liquid line. So I put a little example down here. Say I have a 410A pressure of 300 psig. That converts to 96 degrees Fahrenheit condensing temperature and a liquid line temperature of 81 degrees. So 96 minus 81 equals 15. So in that case, there would be 15 degrees of subcooling. And again, that's just an example. So I mentioned that liquid line in measuring your subcooling. That's just the line leaving the condenser headed towards the metering device. At this point in the cycle, the refrigerant is mostly liquid. The refrigerant is in a high pressure, high temperature subcooled liquid state because we subcooled it at the condenser. So this line is going to be your smaller diameter line. I've got a little arrow pointing there. That's pointing into that uninsulated line. That's going to be your liquid line there. Not a whole lot to talk about there other than, hey, it's a liquid line. So in some units you'll have a receiver. A lot of units have these. The receiver stores liquid refrigerant. So it's pretty much a storage tank for liquid refrigerant. And what this receiver does, especially in TXV or EEV devices, this part ensures 100% liquid to that metering device, so it can get a proper pressure drop. Metering device. This metering device is going to be after your receiver. The metering device is going to create a pressure drop in the refrigerant. So why do we want to create that pressure drop? Well, we have to create that pressure drop in order to lower the temperature of the refrigerant so it can be heated back up once we get to the evaporator. And we'll talk about that in a second. We want to heat it back up in that evaporator so we can boil the refrigerant and kind of get that cooling effect. So after the metering device, the refrigerant is going to be a saturated mixture. Made a misspelling there. Forgot my D there. And it's going to be approximately 80% liquid, 20% vapor. The metering device can be a fixed orifice, EEV, or TXV. Sometimes you'll see automatic expansion valves, but those aren't as common. Evaporator coil. So this coil is going to be in the inside the indoor unit. So if you were to open up your indoor unit, if you have a split system crawling that crawl space, open up that door. If you see a coil in there, that's going to be your evaporator coil. So three basic things happen at the evaporator coil. In the evaporator coil, the refrigerant is absorbing heat. The refrigerant is changing state from a liquid to a vapor, and the refrigerant is being superheated. That refrigerant is changing state from a liquid to a vapor because it's being superheated. I like to use the example of a pot of water. You put a pot of water on the stove. You turn the heat on your stove. What's going to happen eventually? That water's going to boil. So there you have it. And because the refrigerant, I explained that there, because the refrigerant is absorbing heat, it is being boiled inside the evaporator coil. And this is where you're going to get superheat, which we're getting ready to explain. superheat. Very similar to subcooling, but the opposite. So superheat is how much the refrigerant is heated past the liquid to vapor state change. And again, we have a formula for superheat. Superheat equals temperature minus saturation temperature, where temperature is the vapor line temperature and saturation temperature is saturation temperature. Again, the vapor line temperature is measured by attaching a temperature clamp / temperature probe to the vapor line exiting the evaporator coil. The saturation temperature is going to be calculated by converting your low side pressure to a temperature. And again, I said I like to use the little slider tool on the REF Tools app. You may have a PT chart, but either one will work. So, for example, I'm going to have a vapor line temperature of 60 degrees. And again, this is just an example. 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And a low side pressure of 130 psi G, which is around 45 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, this is 410. And 60 minus 45 is 15. So in this case, there would be 15 degrees of superheat. The vapor line / suction line. It's really both these terms, but some people like to call it different things. It really depends on who you ask. So the vapor line is the line of leaving the evaporator coil and headed towards the compressor. In this line, the refrigerant is mostly vapor. The refrigerant state in this line is going to be a low pressure, low temperature, and because we superheated it at the evaporator, it's a superheated vapor state. And this is going to be your line that's larger in diameter. Most of the times, and it should be, it's going to be the insulated line. So you're going to see the arrow pointing right there to that insulated line. That's going to be your vapor line / suction line. After that, we hit an accumulator on some units. An accumulator is the component between the suction line and the compressor. So what the accumulator does is it ensures 100% vapor to the compressor. That's why I have a little insurance policy clip there. It's basically insurance for your compressor, because you do not want liquid refrigerant to your compressor. Your compressor will not like liquid refrigerant. That'll make a nice little noise for you too. It'll talk to you when it gets liquid refrigerant. And why don't we want liquid refrigerant to that compressor? Well, the reason being is because you can't compress a liquid. Compressors start acting weird when they try to compress something that physically can't be compressed. So, and then we go back to the beginning of the cycle at your compressor. So again, I want to thank you for watching. I want to ask you to make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content. Again, like I said, once we get more subscribers, get up to maybe that monetization level, we'll start doing some giveaways and things like that. But again, please feel free to like and subscribe to the channel, share the channel. I want to start growing a little bit so we can get more people interested in the channel, educate more people, help more people out who are coming into the industry, maybe in technical college, maybe they're learning in the field. But again, thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching the On the Hill HVAC channel.